morning, everybody. It's Jean here from Truelove Quilts for You, and this is Jean's Block Party 2019, the beginning week of Jean's Block Party. Thank you, everybody, for your well wishes. I'm feeling a bit better. I was battling bronchitis, but it's getting better. Not 100%, hanging on a little bit. But I've been working on stuff in my room, but we're ready to embark on my block party. And as you know, if you've been following, this is going to be for you beginners, beginners. I know quite a lot of you nice folks have been following me for the last year or so. I'm doing all sorts of things in my sewing room. But this block party was inspired last year by my friend Jen, who was a beginner, and she's like, oh, teach me how to quilt. And it really helped her. What we did last year, Jean's Block Party 2018, was we made 20 12.5-inch blocks that finished at 12 inches and put them together in a sampler quilt. We're going to be doing the same thing with a variation. If you're new here to our block party, we're going to be doing, I'm going to be doing hopefully 2 blocks a week, very simple blocks, but I'm going to be making them at 9.5 inches. They're smaller blocks. Now, I think I was remiss in telling you what to get. In my video, my tutorial to follow, I show you some of the basic things that you need to have, which you probably have. I can't show you how to work your way around a sewing machine. Hopefully you know the basics of that and you have your machine. But this ruler, this is really handy to have. It's a 9.5-inch ruler, whatever brand that you would be comfortable with. This is a OmniGrid, and it's at the very end of when you make your block. You put your block up and you're like, oh, it fits exactly. If you do it exactly as the tutorial shows, and that means your 1/4-inch seam, that means proper pressing, setting seams, and cutting, which hopefully I'll be able to show you. I'm going to be doing very simple blocks. Again, this is not for you even confident beginners. This is for a beginner. But at the end of the day, you will have a block. And oh, one other thing, and I address it again. I hadn't shown you, very important, I have used a 6-inch by 24-inch ruler in my quilting. I think this is a very important tool to have, as well as some of the others. Now, what I have done is I have made the first 2 blocks for us. And as you know, or if you've been following, I'm making a red and white quilt. People are like, oh my goodness, she's making a red and white quilt. I'm okay with it. There's a whole debate, and I'm not going to get into it, about pre-washing or not pre-washing. I don't pre-wash my fabrics. I've only had one disaster years ago. It was my fault. Lots of people pre-wash. By all means, if you want to pre-wash, dry, starch, whatever you do to prepare your fabrics, awesome. These are our 2 blocks. These are the 2 blocks that I've made. Very simple 4-patch to learn the basics of piecing, and then a very simple 9-patch also. These probably are the 2 blocks that go back the earliest, perhaps, in quilt making. You can take 4 patches and make a whole quilt, or 9 patches, or put them together and make a quilt out of them. Very, very simple. I show you the very, very basics of making these blocks. I've done 2 blocks. As I said, I don't know how that will transpire. I do get to be a bit wordy. And as you see in this tutorial, I'm showing you, I'm taking you to my machine, I'm taking you to my ironing board, I'm taking you to my cutting mat, which is just me. I have one camera, that's it. So I'm a little bit all over the place and then having to edit it. So hopefully by the time we move along, I won't have to show you how I sew that, unless it's tricky. You will realize how to sew it. The most important part is, you beginners, hopefully you will have realized that unlike dress making or garment making, quilt making seams are a 1/4 inch. They're not the 5/8 of an inch. They are 1/4 inch. And I show that in my very first block, how you can figure it out, how you measure it, if you need to put a little bit of painter's tape on your bed to make that 1/4 inch. Extremely important. That is one of the most important things. And then next to that, to me, it's pressing. It's the cutting, the sewing, and the pressing, which makes a beautiful quilt. So at the end of the day, you'll have a beautiful quilt. So these are our 2 blocks. Oh, let me show you. I made these, and I've been making, and there you go, ta-da. Fits perfectly. Now I've been making my blocks. I have, there you go. Oops, there you go. There's my 9.5 inches. 9.5 inches raw edge, and then it finishes at 9 inches. We'll be making 42 blocks. I've been using fat quarters, pre-cuts, layer cakes, 10-inch squares, and some yardage. I had been telling the folks last year to get about 15 fat quarters and some yardage, and I think at the end of that quilt, which this quilt probably will end up the same size, I don't know, was it like 60 by 72, something like that. They had started running out of fabric, so you might want to get a little bit more fabric. But whatever you have, and as I've said, this is an incredibly good way to use up scraps also. This is and I explained, this is a 9 patch, but you could have used 9 different fabrics and just cut your small squares. But I explain all that. So this is the beginning of our block party. Hopefully, I'll be putting this up on a Sunday. As I was telling you, my schedule's changed, so don't hold me to it. It'll get there when it gets there. As I said, it's just me and my camera in my sewing room. And so here we are, the beginning of Jean's Block Party 2019. Thanks so much for following along, folks. And I'll tell you about sending photographs in of our blocks. I might not be doing it each block to my website because it's a little bit much. I would rather spend time in my sewing room as opposed to uploading pictures a million. So maybe when we get 6 blocks or something, then you can send them to me and I can put them on the web page so we can share each other's blocks. But yeah, for now, grab your fabric. And if you don't, most important thing, if you're a beginner and you are just starting to quilt, and you've gotten your little kits whatever your budget has allowed you, whatever tool. People ask me what brand I like everything. I use this brand and that brand. I'm not particular about anything except FISKARS. I do love FISKARS. And I like Martelli. I like my Martelli mat, which I tell you. If you're not enjoying the process, stop. It's not worth it. A hobby is meant to be you, wherever you go, with your corner, your dining room, your kitchen table, or your sewing room. If you're not enjoying it, then just stop. You know, if you've made 4 blocks, you've made a table runner. That's cool. But you know, and if you're 12 blocks in, you make up a quilt that's 3 blocks across and 4 down. We are going to be doing 42 blocks. We're going to be moving along quickly. Maybe I'll see how that goes. I don't want this to be an hour-long video. You don't either. But I'll try to figure that out as I go along. So anyway, here we are, Jean's Block Party 2019. Thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. And have fun, you guys. We're in this together. At the end of the day, we're going to make a beautiful quilt. You'll be so thrilled. Okay, see ya. So here we are, ready to start our block party 2019. How exciting. Just a few little notions, hopefully, that you will have in your sewing little arsenal here. Even to prepare and to make a small quilt or small blocks, you need the basics, and I have a video on what basics you need. But for right now, for this project, I'm finding obviously you need your sewing machine, whatever it is, set up for a nice straight stitch, about 2.5 inches, about 2.5, the stitch about 2.5, 12 stitches to the inch or so. A nice pair of scissors. My pin cushion. And what I always do is I have a little pair of scissors tied to my cord next to my machine. A lot of people have an automatic thread cutter. People laugh at me. I have all of these gadgets and gizmos, and I always use my scissors. I'm old school. I'm an old dog. Can't teach me new tricks. It just takes me 2 seconds. You're going to need, obviously, you're going to need a nice ruler. I have said to get a, this is a 3-inch by 18-inch ruler, but I also have a 6-inch by 24-inch ruler, which is handy to have. And if you buy most kits, that's over there. If you buy most kits, like at Joann Fabrics or a kit, they usually come with a 6 by 24-inch ruler, or this one. I'm going to be getting out my 6 by 24-inch because that will be good for cutting fat quarters. As you know, I'm working with layer cakes, which are 10-inch squares, fat quarters, and some yardage. Whatever you have, fabric-wise, you're going to need a nice ruler, a long straight edge. Now also, and I forgot to mention it, and forgive me, for this project, I have this, it's called an Omni-Grid ruler, and it's a 9.5-inch square. Now, if you were following along with the 2018 block party, you knew that our blocks were 12.5 inches. And so I had gotten a 12.5 inch OmniGrid ruler or whatever manufacturer. And it's just really nice for at the end of your block to put your material down and see that you've made a perfect 9.5 inch block. Hopefully that's what we're going to end up with. Now, very important that you have a sharp rotary cutter. Always close the blade. Always close the blade. You make a slice, you close the blade, whatever it is. I have a Martelli mat, which I absolutely love. Martelli.com. They're a family based in Florida. I love the Martelli mat. I have a Martelli cutter. I've not gotten used to it, to be totally honest. I like my rotary cutters. The other one, again, I think my hand motion is just used to this. Jen, who got her Martelli cutting rotary cutter, which is ergonomic, excellent. She's brand new, so she learned it quickly. I'm having the time getting used to it, but I highly recommend the Martelli mat because this mat has been abused, and it's like brand new. The markings on here, which I don't usually use the markings, but you can because they are so precise on this mat. Everybody's different who like to do things. This is the way I'm showing you how to do my things. So to begin with, I'm going to do a simple 4-patch block. Now, I had said if you wanted to get scraps, if you had a bunch of scraps left over, this is an ideal project because we're only making a block that's this big. The most important thing, though, for any of you to realize is the importance, and hopefully even as a beginner, you've practiced and practiced and practiced, of a 1/4 inch seam. In dressmaking and in garment making, you use a 5/8 inch seam. In quilting, we use a 1/4 inch seam, and you really have to perfect your 1/4 inch seam because your blocks won't come together. That is the most precise thing. Really, you have to practice and get correct. By all means, mark it. If you have a 1/4 inch foot on your machine, look it up. If not, then physically mark a 1/4 inch with the same ruler that you're going to be working with, from your needle to the seam allowance. And then there's something called a scant quarter, but we're not getting into that now. We're going to today be perfecting our 1/4 inch seam, making an incredibly simple, very, very easy beginner's block. Now I have both fat quarters, as I said, yardage, and my layer cakes here. I have so much fabric. So I'm just going to pull out a light color, and this one right on top. There you go. And I'm going to make a 4-patch block. Let me see if this is in frame. Yeah, I'm going to be making a 4-patch block out of these 2 pieces of fabric. Okay, now this is a 10-inch square, and from the manufacturers, they're pretty darn good. They're pretty darn close to being 10-inch square. A lot of people say, oh, well, it has a pinked edge. Well, I go to the end of the pink edge, not in the middle, not the valley in. I go to the end, and I just sort of scratch them together. And with what we're going to do here, I'm going to line it up on my mat here, which I know this is a nice square piece. I'm going to cut this directly in half, and I'm going to make a 5-inch. I'm going to make a 5-inch block. Now, the reason I love to have 2 rulers, and again, let me just see if this is, yeah, the reason I love to have 2 rulers, and again, I apologize if I hadn't told you this before because it's so easy, that I find my 5-inch marker. Hopefully we can see that. I find my 5-inch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I find my 5-inch marker on my ruler, on whatever ruler I have, and I put that 5-inch marker right on the edge of that layer cake, right there. And I have 2 pieces of fabric, because right at this point I need 4 pieces of fabric. okay? But 2 of each fabric. So I'm using half of this. I can use the other half later. So what I do is I put that 5-inch mark right there. This is exactly half of this piece of fabric. Then I take this ruler, as you can see, my straight edge, and I just butt it up. And I line it up there, and I line it up here. Okay, then I take my rotary cutter, and I open it up, and I move this aside. This is perfectly straight. This is perfectly straight. And very carefully, I cut. Very carefully, I cut. I cut them in half, like that, okay? And I can put this back in my pile, because the beauty of a 9.5-inch block is that we can use smaller pieces. So again, scrappy, whatever fabrics you have, you can make each block a different color, make a rainbow quilt, or you can, mine is completely 2 colors. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this around here and line it up nicely again on a nice line. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to take my ruler. I'm going to find the 5-inch mark. I'm going to put that 5-inch right on the outside of those pinked edges. And as you can see, here's my 5-inch. There's my 5-inch. I have my other ruler. I'm going to move that away. Open my rotary cutter. Slowly shut my rotary cutter. And I have 4 perfectly square 5-inch blocks. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a checkerboard, a two color block. And there is our first block. There's our first 4-patch block. Now, what you want to do is you're going to take your pins, and I don't use pins a lot, but as a beginner you'll want to use pins. You're going to take this piece over and you're going to put it right on top. You're going to do the exact same thing here. You're going to have the dark on the light and the light on the dark. You want to sort of scratch them together so they're nice and together. And then with your pins, however you want to pin, whether it's this way or whether it's that way, whatever way you're comfortable, you're going to go over to your sewing machine, and I'm going to show you on this center seam. Scratch the fabric together. I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to sew that together. Now I'm at my sewing machine, and as if you've been following, you know I always say you want to sit directly in front of your machine, right in front. If you have a rolling chair, that's awesome, because you just really need to have this part of the machine right in front of you. It really does make the world of difference. Now, and I also like to, I was telling Jen, my friend, who's a beginner sewer, that I like to sit a little bit higher, so I'm sort of looking down on the machine as opposed to looking up to the machine. So now we have our 2 patches here, and what you're going to do is, I have on my foot here, this is a presser foot, or my foot, and then mine is a manual lever. I have a JUKI sewing machine, which is not a computerized sewing machine. It's completely mechanical and completely manual. So I have to reach around the back here and put down my presser foot. Okay, it doesn't have a needle up, needle down, automatic lifter, anything like that. It does have a cutter, which I don't use, but never mind. So my foot here, this edge of my foot here, I know from the manufacturers, goes right on the edge of my piece. Right on the edge. Now, in quilting, as opposed to garment sewing, you don't need to backstitch. You just can start stitching. Now, because all of the seams are interconnected. All of the seams are interconnected. If you want to backstitch, by all means you can, but it's not really necessary. Now, a lot of times, my machine has a little hole. It just has one little hole. This is called the needle plate, and my machine has a little hole. Some of you will have a plate which has a zigzag, which has a larger slot. And that means you could do a zigzag stitch. This is a straight stitch machine. Sometimes when you begin sewing, your fabric will get chewed into that hole, and you're like, what? So what you can do is you can, let me just see here, let me just grab a scrap here. You could just start your quilt sandwich, your fabric, sort of on another piece of fabric. Oh, it's called like it's called a leader and an ender, if you wish to. So you can just smoothly start your seam along here. I don't need to, but if you find that your your fabric is being scrunched into that hole, by all means, start carefully on another little scrap of fabric here, and then you can start sewing. So I know that my foot is 1/4 inch away, my needle to my foot, and so I'm going to start sewing slowly, and when I come to a pin, I'll take my pin out. I'm making a perfect 1/4 inch seam. And I go right to the end and off. Now what you can do now is, if you want, you can take your other piece right there, which we've matched up real nice, and you can just start again. Do a few stitches. You don't have to go mad. Don't go too fast. My nice 1/4 inch. And right off. And I pull my stitches, I clip my threads, and there you go. So now I'm going to go over to my ironing board and I'm going to show you what I do now. So I'm at my ironing board, and here we have our two things that we've just stitched together. Yeah, it's going this way. My seams are going this way. Where's my other seam? Yeah. Okay, so there's our seams. And what you want to do is I use a hot, dry iron. By all means, if you want to use steam, you can, but I don't. I don't personally. Other people do. What I do is sometimes I think a shot of steam can sometimes distort your fabric. So what I do, if I have to use anything, is I use a bottle of water. I just have a bottle of water up here. It's on my shelf right up there. So I just leave it there, leave it on my shelf. And I have this iron, which is called an Olicio Pro, if any of you have seen it. I don't really need to have this silicone thing, but somebody gave it to me. Because as you can see, I put my hand on it, take my hand off. It's a handy dandy iron, I'll tell you. I love it. Some people don't love it. I love my iron. I have it on the hottest cotton setting, because we are using 100% cotton. And it's awesome. So now what you want to do to ensure really beautiful seams is you want to find your seam right there, and you just want to put your iron on it. And what that does is that sets your seam. For the longest time I didn't know what that was meant, but it means that the stitches are sort of sinking into the fabric and becoming sort of part of the fabric, which makes sense. If you watch me, you will know, oh my word, I press and I iron and I press and I iron. I think that is the most important thing in quilting. One of the most important things. So now there is a saying, you always press to the dark side. So we've set our seam. Now this piece here, the seam allowance, I'm pressing it to the red. I'm pressing this white over to the red. And I sort of just push that along with the nose of my iron. I just press that, I roll it up. I roll that up. I roll that seam up there. And then the same with this one. I'm going to just press that right up to the dark side. Being careful not to stretch, being careful not to distort. Again, there's two schools of thought. A lot of people press. I press and I iron. This is ironing. This is pressing. A lot of people want to do it their way, and that's absolutely fine. So now we have two pieces of fabric sewn together. Now what we're going to do is you're going to flip over your top bit, and you will see, if you sewed them perfectly right, that this seam right here, right there, one's going one way, one's going the other way, is going to what's called nest. They nest so beautifully. Can you see that? There's that seam. One goes one way. You can sort of just feel how they nest right in there. Now, by all means, since you're new, by all means, get your pins. And what I do is I would just put a pin right in there. And then up here. And then over here. Now I'm going to go back to my sewing machine. And we're going to stitch this seam here, right through that center seam. And that will have nested beautifully. So we have created our first block. It's exciting. You've made your first 4-patch block. Perfect point, perfect 9.5-inch square. And that's by cutting 2 5-inch squares from 2 different fabrics using your 1/4 inch. So that's our first block there. The most simplest of simplest blocks. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make a 9-patch. Now with a 9-patch, to make a 9.5-inch square, we won't be able to get, we're going to have 5 pieces of 5 blocks and 4 blocks. The 5 and the 4 make 9 blocks. I can't get my 5 pieces out of a 10-inch square. So this is where you need some yardage or a fat quarter, which hopefully you've bought. So I'm going to choose a fat quarter. I'm going to choose just a red and, which one? I like the dots. I like the dots. So now my fat quarters, as you know, are usually measured about 18 inches by 22 inches. Okay? And this one is about exactly 18 by 22. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up, is this in the, yeah, I'm going to line up my fat quarter here. And I'm going to just see if it's nice and square, which it's slightly out of square. You want this part up here along your lines and this down here, and I can see this has not been cut exactly square. So I'm going to put my mark, I got my 6-inch by 24-inch ruler. I'm just going to neaten this edge here. I'm going to put this up on my lines. This goes all the way down to here. I'm going to hold that carefully and go slowly and just straighten up that line right there. Perfect. Now what I want is, because I want my reds on the outside of my 9-patch, you'll see how it goes. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to be cutting. I'm going to take my OmniGrid ruler here, or another ruler if you need, if you like. I'm going to take this and I'm going to find the 3.5, where is it? Where is it? The 3.5-inch 1, 2, 3.5-inch mark right there. There's all sorts. This is OmniGrid, this is Alpha, this is FISKARS, There's all sorts of different cutting things. Do I have a particular one I love? I like them all. I like them all. They all have good uses. Some people like one brand. There's so many things out there. Find what you're comfortable with. But now what we're going to do is I'm going to take my 3.5-inch. This is perfectly square, perfectly straight. And I'm going to do just like I did with the other one. I'm going to cut, let me see if I can get, wait a second, this is, I need 5 of these. So can I get 5, 3.5 out of 18? 5 is 15. Yes, I can. You have to be careful that you're going to get your 5 squares out of your fat quarter. If not, then I would have had to have done it on the long way. But I can get my 5 squares out of this 18-inch. So there's my 3.5-inch, and I measured here perfectly on this line. I hold my ruler, I put my ruler away, and there's that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this sideways. I'm going to line it up on my lines, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. It's nice and straight. I'm going to take my 3.5, what we're doing is we want 5 3.5-inch squares. So here's my 3.5-inch to that line, to the end, and here's my 3.5-inch, and it's beautifully and straight. You hold your ruler, and you cut. Now there are easier ways to do this, obviously, with strip method piecing, but right now we're going to do the good old traditional way. 1, 2. Your fabric is nice and straight all the while. Oops, I cut it on my ruler. 3, 3.5. Make sure it's all nice and straight. I love the idea of my 2 rulers. It just makes it so nice. And then there's hardly any waste. I just used a little bit of that fat quarter. It's all nice and straight. So there's my 5 red blocks for my 9 patch. Now I'm going to take this one, put them over there, and I'm going to make sure, again, this is nice and straight on my line up here on my cutting mat. Just make sure this edge is lovely and straight. That's not too straight, but it's this edge here, which I'm going to, that doesn't matter up here. I'm going to straighten up, neaten up this edge right here. Very slowly cut, close my edge. Now what I'm going to do is I need four 3.5-inch squares of this color. So I've taken my 3.5-inch there and my 3.5-inch. Hold my ruler, keep your fingers out of the way, hold it carefully, slowly, and there. Again, here's my piece, and I'm going to want 4 3.5-inch squares. My ruler, perfect 3.5-inch square. Oops, it shifted. Be careful, check it. You always measure twice, cut once. There's 1. There's 2. Go very slowly with your ruler. If you're not with your rotary cutter, be very, very, very careful. Open it up, close it. There's 3 and 3.5. There's 4. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to lay them out exactly like we did our 4-patch. And again, a 9-patch is a very versatile block. You can make an entire quilt out of a 9-patch. Look how delightful. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. So there's my 9-patch. So we're going to do the exact same thing. What I want you to do is I want you to take this piece here over to that piece there. Okay? And you're going to pin it. Now there is a way to chain piece, but I don't want you to do that right now because you can get confused. Just since you're beginners, you just want to do it this way. So you're going to pin this piece there so it doesn't shift. Okay? And then you're going to do this one over that way, pin it, and then you're going to do this one. Now since you've seen me go over to my sewing machine, I'm not going to show you that right now. I'm going to leave those 3 there. I always have everything right in front of me on my cutting mat, always. I like to have it all visual so I see exactly what I'm doing. So I'll turn it so the camera, so you can see what we're doing. So right now I've done the middle to the left, the middle to the left, the middle to the left. And I'm going to go over and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on all 3 of these units. And then I'll be back. So you can see what I've done here is I've sewn this seam here. I've taken my units over to my ironing board. I've set my seam. And then what I did is I pressed to the dark. And in this respect, I feel the solid red is the dark. Okay, so I've pressed this unit over to here. I've pressed this seam over to the red, and I've pressed this seam here. Now we're going to do the exact same thing on the right side. We're going to lift the right side up and put this here, and then you're going to secure it with your pins. You're going to secure that, scratch them up nice and so they're together. And then I'm going to go over to my sewing machine. And of course, it's always the right sides together. This is a solid, so there's no real right or wrong side, but obviously you're doing the right side to the right side. The pretty side of your fabric to the pretty side of your fabric. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to stitch those 3 seams right there, 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to set that seam, I'm going to roll that to the red. I'm going to roll this to the red, and I'm going to roll that, and then you'll see how easily it will be to nest my seams. I've stitched this seam here, and I've pressed these seams to the dark, to the dark, and to the dark. Now because you do it that way, it's exactly like our 4-patch. We can bring this down, and we can see that those seams, that red and that dot, nest beautifully. You can feel it. Put a pin in there. And then you come and you see that this seam here, this solid red and that dot, nest perfectly. You put a pin in there. And then you're going to sew that seam there. And then you're going to come back, and you're going to come back to this side. I'll pin it right now because I can do this all over at my machine. You're going to see that pin, that seam nests beautifully, and this seam nests beautifully. Now there are 2 trains of thought. Again, this is the way I do it. There are 2 trains of thought that you press your seams open. I don't. I press my seams to one side, but a lot of people press these seams open. I don't do that. I press it to one side. Now I'm going to go over to my machine, and I'm going to sew those 2 seams together. So here are our first 2 blocks. Look at that. Now what I want to do is I want to check my second block, and look at that. A perfect 9.5 inches. Extremely important, your 1/4 inch seam. This isn't a miracle. This is the way it's done. You have your 1/4 inch seam. You have your block, which these blocks will finish at 9 inches. We're making them raw edge, which are 9.5 inches. So I think this is real important. If you're out a little bit and it's a little bit smaller than your rule, you're making your seams too big. If it's bigger, you're making your seams too small. So you have to perfect your 1/4 of an inch seam. Extremely important. Now you can see that those blocks go together beautifully, and right there is a little quilt right there, and you've accomplished that. So with this 9 patch, you cut 5 3.5 inch squares from one fabric, cut 4 3.5 inch squares from another fabric. But by all means, if you have scraps, cut 9 3.5 inch squares from a whole bunch of scraps, and you have a scrappy quilt. By all means, absolutely. You don't need, I'm doing 2 colors, as you know, and this one. So there are, folks, are our first 2 blocks for our 2019 block party. I got to put my thinking cap on and figure out, hopefully I'll be able to do the 2 blocks each week. But I will figure it out. So I hope you enjoyed that. Just remember to press, to do your 1/4 inch seam, to go slowly, and you'll be well on your way to having a beautiful quilt that you'll be so proud of. Thanks, folks. Okay, we'll see you later. Bye.